Welcome to a live edition of the Desmond Johnson Show here on a Tuesday, a college football Tuesday. Just got through week one of the college football opening part of the season. Got a lot of ACC talk in. So I had, of course, special guest host David Glenn from the North Carolina Sports Network in the house. Had to go grab our boy Conor O'Neil from Devils and Deacons Illustrated, the Wake Forest and Duke beat writer. We'll talk about who impressed us the most, who surprised us the most in the ACC. Got a lot of news coming in regarding it, and we'll touch on the elephant in the room, which is what the hell is wrong with Florida State right now, and Clemson for that matter. We'll get into all that and more. It's the Desmond Johnson Show.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
Yeah, welcome to the Carolinas. Everywhere you go, the Tigers, Carolina blue, the finest. Live action, feedback, the city need that. I've been number one, no cap. Here's the recap. Adrenaline is my addiction. I'm about to relapse. Step on the turf if you won't and get your weed whacked. I'm going harder than a martyr on the starter end. It's the heart of man, that's a rap like a cardigan. I'm breaking records, it's fourth and inches, I count the seconds. The over-under's my roar of thunder, my secret weapon. Yeah, the game is to be told. I don't break, I break modes. Follow me on Tobacco Road.
Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
Let's just jump right into it. DG in the house, Conor O'Neil in the house. It's College Football Tuesday. This one's going to be ACC-centric because we just got through week one of the ACC season. And before we do that, though, some college football news that came out yesterday. For those wondering about Washington State and Oregon State, the Pac-12, as they used to be known, the Pac-2 basically right now, they did not reach an agreement with the Mountain West Conference for next year, 2025. The Mountain West and Pac-12 conferences did not come to an agreement to extend their football scheduling beyond this season. While in theory they could come back around and do this, the most likely scenario is that Oregon State and Washington State will build fully independent schedules for the 2025 season or get added to the ACC more than likely, depending on the way this has been going. The lack of an agreement is mainly from the Pac-12's priority to be flexible for changes in college athletics over the next year or so, which is kind of a way of them saying, we don't know what's going to happen. We want to keep our options open, so we don't want to be locked in with the Mountain West Conference. So all 12 Mountain West schools will play 7 conference games, plus either Oregon State or Washington State as part of the agreement they struck back in December that left the Pac-12 with just 2 members. The Pac-12 paid the Mountain West Conference $14 million in order to do that. So we'll keep an eye on that. I mentioned that because I feel like the next step is going to happen here in terms of expansion. As I sat back and watched like the new SEC and the new Big Ten, you're getting crazy. USC beating LSU, all this like stuff going on with these 2 super conferences right now. And I'm looking at the ACC like, what do they need to do to get there? Because it feels like they're like 2 schools short. So really, I wanted to start off this with a hypothetical with both of you guys. In a perfect world, with the way college football is situated right now, what 2 schools would be perfect for the ACC to poach to get to 18 schools playing football and be not on the same level as the SEC and Big Ten, but at least have the same number of members and maybe the same notoriety as these so-called super conferences going on? There's two schools out there on a wish list for you that you want to join the ACC that would make sense, that would elevate the college football fingerprint for the ACC.
Go ahead, Connor.
Well, I think they only need 1 because there's 17 right now.
Is that counting Notre Dame? Kind of, sort of.
No.
There's, no, wait, yeah, just SMU. I keep forgetting it's SMU, Cal, and Stanford. So so really they need 1 more. So if you can't get Notre Dame,
it's just Notre Dame is where the conversation starts and ends to me. It's convincing them to forego 60, 70, 80 years of tradition, and they're clinging to that independent status. And I don't know if it'll ever happen. John Swofford wasn't able to do it. Jim Phillips hasn't been able to do it. I don't know if Jim Phillips or the next commissioner will be able to do it. David's probably more tapped into that than me, but to me, that's basically the conversation.
What's the odds, DG?
I think Connor's bottom line is the right one. We still live in a world where you got to bring more to the table than you cost as a mouth to feed, right? And, a lot of people forget it wasn't because SMU and Cal and Stanford were going to either upgrade the ACC's football product or, serve as some kind of TV magnet to upgrade the TV eyeballs. It was much more about math and not falling below 15 schools to jeopardize the ACC's contract with ESPN. The way it's written, the ACC protects itself, even if Florida State and Clemson leave, as long as they stay at 15 schools or above. So Notre Dame, of course, would add a ton financially, image-wise, and in every other way. But they love their independence. They love their NBC TV contract. They love their autonomy with scheduling for the most part in football. So I don't think that's going to change. And Des, there really are no dream teams out there. The sad part for the ACC, and Conor mentioned some former ACC commissioners, I covered this league in the early 90s when my home state, Penn State, the Nittany Lions were flirting with the idea of joining a league. And the ACC, in the words of Gene Corrigan, the late great commissioner of the ACC, he said to me, we were asleep at the switch. And the next thing they know, Nittany Lions have joined the Big Ten when that would have been a new state for the ACC at the time, a football power for the ACC with what Joe Paterno was doing. And more recently, I know the ACC had casual talks with the Texas Longhorns roughly a decade ago. Remember when Maryland left the ACC for the Big Ten? Everybody started placing those casual phone calls just to see. No official offer or documentation or anything like that. But it was, wow, yeah, the ACC would have loved to have had the Texas Longhorns, the state of Texas, the traditional football power, TV eyeballs. Obviously, the Longhorns, while frustrated with the Big 12 at the time, and that was the reason for the ACC's phone call, why not ask? They eventually found their new home in the Southeastern Conference. So those were two really bad missed ships passing in the night. And now the ACC finds itself kind of painted into the corner because programs can grow over time, but there's nobody right now that would add more to the ACC who's available than they would cost as a new mouth to feed.
So it feels like Notre Dame's in the driver's seat, even after all this, because I was thinking, well, they've kind of got it situated. And Notre Dame, and I have them written down here, they may be a national contender this year, but they won't be able to host a playoff game because they can't win a conference championship. So to me, it was like maybe they got that in there so they could kind of nudge Notre Dame to ACC, because if I'm not mistaken, if they do join a conference, the ACC gets first dibs. That's part of the agreement or whatever, right?
That's contractually true, but a lot of people wonder in a world where the law can be very complex, and I say that as a guy who's been an attorney for a long time. What if Notre Dame just said, yeah, we know what we signed, and we're committed to join the ACC if we join anybody, but we're joining the Big Ten? Well, then you have lawsuits to determine what is the penalty for that, because I promise you it's unlikely that there's a dollar amount written into that promise. And then you just get back where we are with the Clemson and Florida State lawsuits. We have all these people understandably frustrated with how American law works, where the common sense in you says, wait a minute, Clemson and Florida State repeatedly, willingly, knowingly, and without any accusations of fraud signed all these grants of rights, and now they're looking for legal loopholes to get out, which is exactly what's happening.
Literally.
But there's a chance they will. I understand why that bothers so many people. I still rather be the ACC as someone who's seen those contracts than I would be Florida State or Clemson. But that doesn't mean there's a 0% chance that some judge somewhere likes one of these arguments, creative arguments from the Tigers or the Seminoles. And that's why this whole picture is so fragile right now.
Conor O'Neil and David Glenn joining me here on the Desmond Johnson Show, College Football Roundtable Tuesday, brought to you by Emergency Responders Credit Union. I want to get over, we touched on just briefly, but let's go ahead and get to the main event here. Florida State and Clemson. We have discussed these two schools in ad nauseum the past couple of months for other reasons, legal reasons, them trying to escape the ACC. They've been done so wrong. Their brands are being squashed, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if anybody had on their bingo card that Florida State would be 0-2 starting the season and Clemson would just drop a stinker. I don't think anybody had Clemson winning against Georgia, but just scoring 3 points. Come on, man. Like, what are we doing? Like, who's in more trouble? Or who's the bigger surprise? Maybe that's the better question. Florida State or Clemson in your eyes? DG, let's start off with you.
Oh, no doubt Florida State at 0-2 is infinitely more surprising than Clemson at 0-1, in part because of what you just said, Des. Most teams facing the number one Georgia Bulldogs would lose. They might not lose quite like that in Atlanta, but they'd almost all lose to the Bulldogs. So we'll see how the Tigers bounce back from by far the toughest game on their schedule. It's a lot harder to predict that the Seminoles are going to lose to Georgia Tech in Ireland and then lose at home to Boston College, who's under a first-year coach in Bill O'Brien. I always start the answer with personnel. And one of the funny questions I've gotten is, does it hurt the Clemson and Florida State lawsuits that they suck right now? The legal answer is no. It is not a legal factor that they're playing so poorly. I know why people ask, but that's a simple no. It doesn't matter for those purposes. But in terms of what's going on at FSU, I really believe it starts with personnel. And my long story short about the Seminoles is they had the ACC Offensive Player of the Year in Jordan Travis at quarterback last year. And they have DJ Uiagalelei, who drove Clemson fans nuts for 2 years as their starter with his various ups and downs and inaccuracies and inconsistencies. So you went from an elite quarterback to, I won't call him a bad quarterback. He's won 30 or so college games as a starter, but he's certainly never been an elite quarterback, period. Yeah. Meanwhile, a lot of the skill players at Florida State that have moved on to the NFL, they were really proven commodities. And what FSU has right now is a bunch of intriguing talents, many of them transfers from Alabama and other places who were kind of stuck on the depth chart behind somebody. And really, none of them is a super proven commodity. So if you go from elite at QB, running back, wideout to intriguing and talented, but not quite proven at QB and running back and wideout, and then you have some weird offensive line issues beyond that are hard to explain, of course, you're going to come back to earth a little bit. Although, again, I wouldn't have predicted crashing back to earth at 0-2.
It's shocking. Connor, which one was your bigger surprise, FSU or Clemson here over the past 8 or 9 days?
It's obviously Florida State, but just to kind of play the devil's advocate here, the shocking part of Clemson is that they look the same as they did in last year's opener. I covered that game at Duke. They were physically outmatched. They were out-physicaled by the, academically focused, like non-traditional football powerhouse Duke. So what did we think was going to happen? And it all rounds back together to, like, if you couldn't get up for the opener at Duke, how were you ever going to get up for an opener against this Georgia team that, look, that program won back-to-back national championships, were a game away from being in the running last year, and probably, like, hindsight being 2020, maybe they should have been in the playoff last year. That's a machine of a team. So the other part that is just astounding to me is looking at how both of these schools use the transfer portal, because we know Clemson just doesn't use it. Yeah. We know Florida State has gone to it a lot.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this study of, you can have overexposure in the portal and you can rely on it too heavily like Florida State has, and your player development sags off. You can also take 2 transfers in 3 years and your recruiting misses show up. So where Clemson has elite talent at certain positions, like anybody in the country takes Phil Maffa and Jake Brenningstool and some of their defensive linemen and linebackers, they're starting for every team in the country. But they've had recruiting misses at other positions, and because of their refusal to use the portal, they can't fill those. You can't backfill with portal guys. So there's two ends of the spectrum on how you can use the portal. Both extremes are wrong, and that's where both of the ACC's like most traditional powers are living right now.
It does feel like 2 extremes almost with Clemson and Florida State with the portal, where FSU's leaned on it almost too much, and Clemson refuses to use it at all. I thought I saw something yesterday that Clemson and like the service academies are like the only ones that haven't really used the portal, and the portal's leveled the playing field so that the rest of the world caught up to Clemson. Like the thing that kind of drove Clemson and like Alabama and Georgia was that they were getting these top 25, top 30 recruits every single year. And you stack class upon class upon class. Yeah, you might have some misses, but for the most part, you're going to have hits. And if you're in a league where you're competing against North Carolina and Duke and Wake and others in recruiting, that's kind of your thing. That's what keeps you ahead. The portal made all that disappear pretty much in my eyes, where Now you can get a Boston College sneak up on a Florida State in Tallahassee and do that, especially if you've ignored key components to your roster. With Clemson, it just feels like stubbornness, like from Dabo Swinney at this point. Like he just wants to prove he can do it without the portal, and I don't think he can at this point. It's weird to say it, but if Clemson has another year like last year where they were somewhat down, is Dabo in the hot seat?
I don't think
it's weird to say that.
He's not on the hot seat in terms of getting fired by the administration, but is he on the hot seat in terms of, getting calls from Bubba in Spartanburg?
That happened last year.
They cut off phone calls. Now you have to text in your complaint or question.
Oh, there it is.
But Dabo is stubborn about the transfer portal, and he'll always say, hey, we do try to sign some. They just missed on all their transfer targets this year. But I just remind folks, it still comes down to talent evaluation, right? A year ago, when Keon Coleman was one of Florida State's best players, and Johnny Wilson, also in the NFL, was a great player for them, they were not, we think they'll be good guys at their previous schools. They were, we know they're really good guys. And sure enough, they're great for the Seminoles. This year's portal incomers, most of them, were a little bit more stuck on the depth chart somewhere else. Prep stars from a few years ago. We think they're untapped talents. That's a lot different than thinking or than knowing that the guy has already been in a power conference, an elite all-conference player. And one last thing on Clemson's stubbornness along those lines, everybody's thinking about culture, right? And there is a happy medium blend. You're crazy, as Des says. If you ignore the portal, you're crazy. It'd be like saying we live in a world now where 1/3 of all the best players come from this faucet, but we're going to turn that faucet off. Like
we're against that faucet. Yeah.
There's no justifying that. And I love and respect Dabo. There is no way to justify that approach, period, regardless of your philosophy about culture. But here's what's scary to Conor's point. When App State goes to Death Valley this weekend, and I want to say this very specifically so I don't get everybody all mad at me, would you rather have App's combination of quarterback, running back, wide receivers, and I'll even say tight end? I'm not saying defense. I'm not saying offensive line. I'm saying
you got me thinking. Like,
I would rather have Joey Aguilar of App State than Cade Klubnik, period. Running back, I love Phil Maffa, but App has a really good one too. Wide receiver, I think I would take App State's receivers. And App State also has a first-team All-Sun Belt tight end, although Brenningstool from Clemson's also a good tight end. My point is, you could take Clemson skill players. It's not a night and day difference. It's a really close call. And in terms of more proven commodity at the most important position on the field, it's not even close. Joey Aguilar is the preseason player of the year and set a bunch of records last year at App State in the Sun Belt. And Cade Klubnik was recently ranked by Pro Football Focus, which analyzes and dissects every play every week, as the 11th best starting quarterback in the 17-team ACC. Ouch. You don't expect to see that at Clemson. And until he gets better, and it's not like he's a redshirt freshman anymore, the Tigers are not going to be that steamroller that they were for 6 years, guys. Yeah. They had 6 straight ACC titles and 6 straight top 5 finishes in the national polls. That's one of the greatest runs in the history of the Atlantic Coast Conference, or even the country for that matter. 2 national titles in there, 2016 and 2018. The last 3 years, they've still been good. Anybody would like to average 10 wins, but not as good.
It's crazy, too. You want to see chaos? If App State goes down to Clemson and beats Clemson on Saturday, like you want to just hear like the bottom falling out in the state of North Carolina, that we'll see what happens with that. Moving on real quick, got DG and Conor O'Neil here on your lunch break here on the Desmond Johnson Show, chopping up the ACC previous weekend. Who looked the best to you out of all the teams this week in the ACC? Like, were there any surprises? Who either looked the best to you, or who was surprised you the most in terms of maybe a loss they took that you weren't expecting them to take, or how they looked? Conor,
Miami was clearly the best. Like
Miami,
Cam Ward, it's one game, but he was everything and more that you expected him to be as preseason ACC Player of the Year. He looked like he was moving in slow motion at a faster rate than everyone else on the field. It was uncanny. If not for Travis Hunter playing 130 snaps and being a lead on both sides of the ball, my week 1 Heisman ballot is Cam Ward at the top. I'm curious how it plays out, though. I am not a believer in Mario Cristobal. I think they find a way to blow a game or two, and I really cringe at the prospect of the ACC attaching all of its hopes after week 1 to a Mario Cristobal coach team.
DJ?
Yeah, my number 1 team is Miami. The surprising loss would probably be Virginia Tech going to Vanderbilt and face planting in overtime.
Yeah.
But to the Canes, I do think their offense is for real. Mario Cristobal, of course, is a former Canes player who was there when they were winning national championships. He has a pretty good tradition on the offensive line as well as a coach. Cam Ward looked like an NFL quarterback against Florida. Mario called him an alpha in the preseason. To go into the swamp, I know it's not vintage Florida Gators, but in that hostile environment against an SEC team, and as Conor said, look like you're playing in slow motion, like your name is on the marquee outside the opposing team stadium. I mean, that's the swagger he played with. And some of those throws, that one in the back of the end zone to Jacoby George, there's not a half a dozen quarterbacks in college football that are making that throw. And there were a few others. He has great receivers, good enough running backs, pretty good offensive line, really talented tight ends. You know, if the Canes are going to do what they usually do, which is disappoint, it's going to be because of their defense. I'm not sure they have a great defense yet, but as long as they stay healthy on offense, this has the chance to be as good a team as Miami has had, and this is their 21st season as Atlantic Coast Conference members. They've never won an ACC football title. They have had a couple of good years, and I think this is going to be another one of those good years. We'll just see if it ends in Charlotte at the ACC title game or not.
All right, so real quick before I get you guys both out of here, you've had a sampling of 1 week. Pick who wins the ACC.
I'd want to remind myself of all the schedules in my head. I do think Miami has a chance. Obviously, the Seminoles have 2 conference losses, right? Like,
yeah,
it's one thing to be 0-2. It's what you only play 8 conference games. So
you got to run the table, brother, right?
I believe Miami will be there. I do. Against 2, to me, the door is cracked for Louisville. The door is cracked. Even if NC State loses to Tennessee, which is probable, the Wolfpack still could have a great season in conference play. The door is cracked, man. Whoever you like the most, they're not vintage. They're not bulldozers. They're good. But the margin for victory, door's cracked for Georgia Tech, right? I mean, why not? And that makes it more fun with Clemson and Florida State struggling right now.
Connor,
I will take Clemson only because I'm kind of Charlie Brown to Cade Klubnik's Lucy. I think there's got to be something there that they saw that they could push DJU out for him. I don't know if it comes together. I know that Clemson doesn't have a better quarterback, or he would have been played by now.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, Christopher Vizina is not the generational prospect that, when it was Kelly Bryant's team in 2018, there was Trevor Lawrence behind him. I don't think there's that. So it's got to be Cade Klubnik. I just between the Charlie Brown reference with the quarterback position and also the wide receiver position. I mean, we've heard so many times over the last 3 or 4 years that they have freshman receivers coming that are going to be difference makers, and they're just not. We're still hearing the same things about guys like Bryant Wesco, who played 12 out of 52 snaps against Georgia. So I want to see more. They're the team that doesn't have an ACC loss yet. And they lost to the SEC team that isn't the designated doormat in the way that Virginia Tech did. So
yeah,
I will stick with Clemson. That's kind of what I know and who I know. So maybe there's a little safety in that, but that's where I'd go.
Right now, I'm leaning towards NC State. And I think part of it for me is more I feel like I know a handful of those kids because they attracted a lot of North Carolina high school stars that ended up went someplace and came back to North Carolina and kind of grouped at NC State. And with a lot of the high school stuff that I do, a lot of the names I'm seeing pop up on here, I'm like, hey, I saw that kid at Chambers 3 years ago, or hey, I saw that kid at Huff a couple years ago, or hey, that kid played at East Forsyth, like that kind of thing. And there's a lot of them. And like I'm just looking through the thing, like Casey Concepcion, the wide receiver, 9 receptions, 121 yards, 3 touchdowns. Granted, it's against Western Carolina. And yeah, it was kind of a back and forth. All these games are really preseason games, really, for college football. Like, that's why the scores look kind of weird for some of them. That's why you got 60-point blowouts like 5-6 different times in the SEC. This is week 1. Week 2, we'll start to see a little bit more how it's going to go. I know we got hard outs for DG, and we got to get everybody out of here. Any last words on anything you saw this weekend that gave you a cause for concern, a cause of, ooh, I didn't think that was going to be something I paid attention to going forward? Anything that popped out in your mind from week 1, or pretty much chalk in terms of what you expected?
I'll jump in real quick and give Conor a second to get his wheels turning on this one. But I just want to remind folks, with Max Johnson out for the Tar Heels as their starting quarterback, there was an emergency turn to Conor Harrell previously in Carolina football history. It was called the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and it was an absolute disaster. That final score was ugly, 30-10. But guys, there were false starts because of a young quarterback. There was intentional grounding. There was an illegal offensive lineman downfield. They barely crossed midfield. I think 2 of their second half possessions, only 2 ended in West Virginia territory in a second half where they were shut out. I mean, they hadn't been shut out for a half under Drake May. I can promise you that.
Yeah.
Yes, the Heels were missing some players in that bowl game, obviously opt-outs and injuries and transfer portal, but so was West Virginia missing some players. And I remind people, Conor Harrell had Omarion Hampton behind him in that bowl game. He had 4 of his 5 starting offensive linemen in front of him. He had not all, but most of the wide receivers that he still has now. He has not shown any capability of being even an average ACC quarterback. And I know Carolina fans were moaning about Max Johnson not doing enough at Minnesota. Conor Harrell can run. I mean, he can flat out accelerate with his legs as quickly as any Carolina quarterback I've ever seen. But he has not shown the ability to be anything but deer in the headlights when it comes to the passing game at the college level. And that's a massive challenge. Good thing for the Heels is their next several games are at home against beatable opponents. But Conor Harrell better be a much better version of himself by the time that 8-game ACC schedule rolls around, or the Heels are going to be in some trouble.
Hopefully they lean on Omarion Hampton more, who apparently is at like God level on the college football video game, but they're not giving him enough reps on the field. So hopefully they lean on Hampton and go from there. Got to get you guys out of here. We'll be back tomorrow, the high school football preview. We have not 1, 2, 3, or 4. We have 5 live games on Friday night going on because I am completely crazy. We'll go through the matchups, some of the biggest matchups in the state of North Carolina. Mark Pruitt from the Winston-Salem Journal will be here with me. I believe we'll have Kevin Wallace, the head coach of West Forsyth, as well. So come back tomorrow. Get your fix in during lunch. Shout out to Conor O'Neil and David Glenn for stopping by. DG will be back in 2 weeks. This is the Desmond Johnson Show. We'll see you later.